Flight 782 from New York to Dubai was nearly full, and the sleek hum of quiet affluence filled the air inside the business class cabin. The overhead lights glowed soft gold, casting a warm sheen over leather seats and polished armrests. Stewardesses, in crisp uniforms, offered glasses of chilled champagne, while passengers reclined with noise-canceling headphones and glowing screens. It was the kind of flight where people didn't ask questions, only ordered more wine. An elderly man entered, quietly. He walked with a noticeable limp, but his posture was proud, upright. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted a folded boarding pass in his pocket. His clothes were clean but modest, a pressed button-down shirt, an old bomber jacket that looked like it had stories to tell, and polished but scuffed shoes. He found his assigned seat, 12A, and settled in. No laptop, no designer bag. Just a faded canvas satchel and the look of someone who'd seen the world but never tried to own it. A few minutes later, a young couple boarded and stopped near his seat. The woman glanced at him, then looked at her ticket, frowning. "Excuse me?" she said to the flight attendant. "I believe this seat is ours?" The attendant checked both tickets, then tapped her tablet. Her face shifted into polite protocol. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, leaning in toward the elderly man. "It looks like there's been an error. You're not supposed to be in business class. We'll need you to move back to economy." He blinked once. "I was issued this seat, 12A. Yes, I understand. But unfortunately, the system's showing a mismatch. You may have been upgraded in error." "May I ask why I was upgraded, then removed?" Her tone stiffened. "It doesn't matter, sir. Please, we need to resolve this so we can close the cabin." Passengers around them began to murmur. One man in a Navy suit rolled his eyes. "Holding up the flight," he muttered. The old man paused for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Of course. No problem." He stood. His knees cracked. His satchel swung gently against his side. He didn't raise his voice or argue. He didn't demand to speak to anyone. He just walked. No one applauded. No one stood to stop him. Some passengers looked away, pretending not to notice. Others watched with blank, passive stares. Just another delay to a long flight. Only one person truly watched him leave. From the cockpit, Captain Elias Quinn had been reviewing flight paths when he glanced up through the small glass door. He calmed, saw the man being escorted to economy, saw the quiet dignity in the way he walked, saw the satchel, the limp, the jacket, and then he froze. Because he knew that man. He knew exactly who that man was, and just like that, Elias Quinn took off his headset, unbuckled his harness, and stepped out of the cockpit, his face carved in stone. Something was about to change. The cabin was quiet again, save for the occasional clink of a spoon against a fine porcelain teacup or the whisper of air circulating through the overhead vents. Business class on Flight 782 always operated like a floating temple of calm and privilege, its inhabitants wrapped in tailored suits and curated perfumes, immersed in financial reports or luxury travel blogs on glowing tablets. But beneath that polished surface, something had shifted. Captain Elias Quinn stood in the cockpit doorway, staring down the aisle at the curtain separating business class from economy. His fingers were clenched into fists, his jaw worked in tight, silent rhythm. A shadow crossed his face as he turned to his co-pilot. "I'll be back in a minute," he said, voice low and controlled. "Sir?" the co-pilot asked, glancing up from the pre-flight checklist. Quinn didn't respond. He was already walking. Each step down the aisle echoed with increasing tension. The flight attendant standing near the curtain flinched as he approached. Passengers glanced up from their complimentary champagne glasses, some expecting an announcement or security check. None expected what was about to happen. "Excuse me," Quinn said as he reached the head flight attendant. She stood stiffly, tablet in hand, trying to maintain the professionalism demanded of her. Her name tag read M. Lawton, and she was the type who followed rules precisely, no more, no less. "Yes, Captain?" she asked, brows raised but lips tight. "I need to know who gave the order to remove that elderly gentleman from seat 3C. She blinked. Her eyes darted momentarily to the curtain, then back at him. Captain, there was a boarding pass discrepancy. The seat was apparently assigned in error. His actual boarding pass was for 29E. That's not what I asked. Her face paled slightly. Sir, it's airline protocol. No, it's not, he snapped, just above a whisper. Protocol is to verify identity before embarrassing someone in front of strangers. Protocol is to show discretion, especially when someone holds more dignity in one wrinkle than half this cabin does in a lifetime. Now, the conversation wasn't just between two employees. Business class had taken notice. One man, a tech, executive seated in 2A, had already begun recording. The tension in the cabin was thick. Quinn took a step forward and lowered his voice, but his words had a slicing clarity. That man is Colonel Abraham T. Knox, retired Air Force. He flew in the Gulf, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He earned 3 Silver Stars, a Purple Heart, and the Distinguished Flying Cross. He's survived ejections, enemy fire, and years in a North Vietnamese prison camp. Passengers who had previously rolled their eyes at the old man now began to look around, embarrassed, unsure. Quinn continued. His voice was louder now, just enough to carry to the rest of the cabin. And when I was 10 years old, Colonel Knox ran into a burning home to pull my sister and I out before the fire reached the nursery. My parents weren't home. He was our neighbor. He didn't hesitate. You could hear a pin drop. The man in 2A slowly lowered his phone. Quinn scanned the cabin, meeting the eyes of every man and woman seated before him. He taught me to fly. He inspired me to serve. Everything I know about honor, courage, and duty, I learned from that man. If he isn't good enough for business class, then neither am I. Then he said the words that would detonate across social media and cable news within the hour. Until Colonel Knox is given his seat back, this plane is going nowhere. Without waiting for a response, Quinn turned and walked down the aisle, past business class, past the curtain, and into economy. The passengers, in the back, craned their necks to see what was going on. Quinn found Colonel Knox sitting quietly by the window in 29E, hands folded on his lap, gazing at the runway. Colonel, Quinn said softly. Knox turned. His eyes were sharp, clear, no bitterness, just the same calm resolve that had carried him through war. I'm sorry, Quinn said. The colonel smiled faintly. Not your fault, son. Life's full of little indignities. No, sir. This one's not going to stand. Knox tilted his head. Why not? Because I wouldn't be flying this plane if it weren't for you. You don't belong in the back. Not today. A young woman in the aisle seat of 29E scooted aside without a word, recognizing the importance of the moment. As the captain helped Colonel Knox up, a murmur passed through the cabin. People were starting to understand that they were witnessing something unusual, something larger than just a seat change. When the two men re-entered business class together, the atmosphere had shifted. Tension had turned into reverence. Some passengers stood up, not because they were told to, but because they felt compelled to. Others clapped quietly at first, then more loudly. Colonel Knox paused, startled. He gave a small, appreciative nod as Quinn escorted him back to 3C. The elderly man took his seat again, and the pilot turned to face the flight attendant. We good now? He asked. She nodded, a little breathless. Yes, Captain. Good. He turned on his heel and headed back to the cockpit. But the story was already airborne, faster than the plane. Colonel Abraham T. Knox sat quietly in the terminal, his aged hands folded neatly in his lap. He gazed through the window at the tarmac, watching planes rise into the sky one by one, like arrows of steel slicing through cloud and wind. Around him, the airport bustled. Gate changes announced over loudspeakers, children tugging on their parents' sleeves, and business people walking briskly with phones pressed to their ears. But in his little corner, all was still. He wasn't used to attention, and he certainly didn't know the world was already watching. 20 minutes earlier, he had been removed from business class and quietly returned to economy without argument. He hadn't wanted to make a scene. He didn't blame the flight crew. Mistakes happened. He was just grateful to be flying. At 81, with aching knees and a weather-beaten heart, he had accepted discomfort as a constant companion. Besides, humility had been etched into his bones long before this flight. During his time in captivity as a prisoner of war, dignity had meant silence, endurance, patience. For a week, Tyrone avoided the cameras. He ignored interview requests, let phone calls ring out, and barely touched his food. But the world kept knocking. Protesters gathered outside the CVS where it all began, carrying signs that read, "Justice for Tyrone," and "Waiting isn't a crime." Students marched, churches prayed, lawyers called, and finally, Tyrone answered. The moment came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. His sister Jasmine sat across from him at their mother's kitchen table, stacks of papers spread out like a battlefield, legal briefs, body cam records, civil rights case studies. Her laptop chimed with updates from a pro bono legal team in D.C. who had offered their full support. Tyrone looked up from the documents, his fingers tense around a cold glass of water. "You really think we can win this?" Jasmine didn't hesitate. "I don't think. I know. And it's not just about you anymore, Ty. It's about every person who's ever been seen as a threat for doing absolutely nothing." That night, they filed Tyrone Willis versus City of Greenridge Police Department and Patricia Landry. The lawsuit alleged racial profiling, wrongful detainment, emotional distress, and violations of civil liberties. It named both arresting officers for excessive force and unlawful detainment. It named Patricia Landry for filing a false police report based on implicit racial bias. It even included CVS, though symbolically, for failing to publicly demand accountability from the department beyond a single corporate press release. The lawsuit made headlines instantly. Civil rights organizations rallied behind it. News anchors debated it. One viral clip showed a legal analyst breaking down the footage. You can see Mr. Willis clearly showing his name tag, calmly explaining himself. There's no threat, no crime, just a man sitting. This isn't just excessive, it's systemic. But just as the momentum surged in Tyrone's favor, the city fired back. The Greenridge Police Department released edited body cam footage, spliced and cut to make Tyrone look uncooperative. Clips out of context, words trimmed mid-sentence. It was an old tactic, but still dangerous. Some conservative media outlets latched onto it, painting Tyrone as hostile and questioning his intentions that night. For a moment, the tide shifted, but then came the leak. An anonymous source from inside the department sent the uncut footage to the press, and the truth was undeniable. The video showed Tyrone's full compliance, from the moment the officers approached to when the handcuffs clicked into place. His voice never rose, his body never moved aggressively. He was, in every second, exactly what he said he was. A man, waiting to go home. Public opinion snapped back in his favor with a vengeance. Tyrone stood at a press conference the next morning, in front of the same CVS bench where it all began. "I didn't want this attention," he told the crowd. "But if it helps the next person stay safe, if it forces even one officer to think twice, then I'll take every headline and carry it with me." The bench behind him sat empty, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a symbol of pain. It felt like a place where a movement began. Bench was no longer just a bench. City workers had planned to remove it, claiming it was damaged and a site of controversy. But the people said no. A petition gained over 50,000 signatures in a week. Local artists proposed turning it into a community memorial. Even the mayor, once silent, issued a statement. "That bench represents more than an incident. It's a mirror, and it's time we look into it." So they left it there, but changed it forever. A brass plaque was installed on the backrest, etched with simple words, "In honor of Tyrone Willis, and all those who wait in peace, but are seen as a threat. May we sit without fear." The day, the plaque was revealed, a crowd gathered, not in protest this time, but in unity. Families came with folding chairs, teachers brought students. Even CVS employees, many of whom had quietly supported Tyrone from behind the counter, showed up in full uniform. Tyrone sat on the bench again, the same one where it all began. But now, he wasn't alone. He wore a gray suit and a red CVS pin on his lapel. His quiet nod to the job he once held and the life that once felt so small. Jasmine stood beside him, her arms folded with pride. She had been offered internships at civil rights firms across the country and was already being called the next Thurgood Marshall. But Tyrone? He had choices too. CVS had offered him a regional management position. Civil rights groups asked him to speak at conferences. A book deal was in the works. Even the city council wanted to appoint him to a newly formed task force on police accountability. Still, he hadn't said yes to anything yet. "I'm still deciding," he told a local journalist. "I didn't ask to become anything more than a man getting off work. But if I can use this moment to make sure no one else has to fight just to sit, then maybe that's exactly what I need to be." The lawsuit remained in motion. Settlement offers had started arriving, quiet ones, with lots of zeros and no admission of guilt. Tyrone's lawyers were weighing them, but he made it clear. It wasn't about the money, it was about change. The arresting officers were under internal investigation. Patricia Landry had issued a public apology, half-hearted and clearly coached by lawyers, but she had also resigned from her HOA board and taken down her Facebook page after weeks of pressure and community backlash. Still, the damage had been done. Her face, like Tyrone's, had become a symbol, but symbols fade. Legacies last. That evening, as the crowd thinned and the sun dipped below the trees, Tyrone remained seated on the bench, alone at last. He watched cars pass. He listened to the wind in the trees. No cuffs, no questions, just peace. For the first time since that night, Tyrone let himself breathe and smile, because sometimes the most radical act of all is simply being allowed to sit in your own skin and be seen.